officially get started with our Aurifil Color Builders 2021 quilting projects, I want to take us through adjusting tension on the long arm as well. My name is HollyAnne Knight of String and Story, and it's my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. I'm super excited to be your free motion quilting expert and guide as we go through this year together. Now, we've already talked together a little bit about 40-weight thread. We've adjusted tension on our domestic machines, and now we're going to work here on my Moxie, my long arm machine. Now, what I'm going to show you today is going to work well on long arms on a frame, just like this one, on industrial style sit down machines like my Juki J150, or if you have a sit down long arm. And the biggest difference between what we're about to do here on the long arm and what we've already done on our domestic machine is taking into account our bobbin tension. Now, all of these machines that I just mentioned are industrial style, which means that the bobbin underneath is in a removable case like this instead of having a drop-in bobbin. That means you as the machine user have control over the bobbin tension rather than simply just having your tension adjusted when you take your machine in for service. Now, a note about this. If you have never adjusted your bobbin tension before on an industrial style machine, I highly recommend you look at my full tutorial on the TOA gauge that's available on my website. Essentially, this is the tool that you're going to use in order to adjust your bobbin tension. I like to adjust mine to be just under 200 micronewtons, and that's a good place to be starting, all right? So I've already adjusted the bobbin on this machine, so now from this point forward, all of the tension adjustments we're going to be doing here together are going to be on our top thread, just like we've already done on our domestic machine. The same principles apply, that you've got that top thread coming down, your bobbin casing clicks, though it's oriented a little bit differently. A twist is formed between those two threads, and then you move your machine to create the stitches, the needle moves again and creates another twist. Just like on the domestic machine, we want that twist to land in the center of our batting so that we get clean, crisp stitches top and bottom. Now, besides the bobbin casing adjustment, the other two things I want you to keep in mind is that there are no feed dogs on a long arm on a frame or a sit down long arm. I do have feed dogs on my industrial sit down machine, but they are lowered when I'm free motion quilting. So you are entirely in charge of moving the machine, creating the stitches. You might, like I do on this machine, have a stitch regulator that's helping with that, all right? The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that it's a little bit trickier to check your tension on the back of your quilt if you have it on a frame like this one. If we're on any kind of sit-down machine, all the way from a domestic to a sit-down long arm, then it's very easy to simply pause, needle down, flip your quilt over, check everything, carry on. So we're going to talk today a little bit about some strategies for checking your tension as you're going. But because it is more challenging to see the back of the quilt in real time, I'm also going to give you some tips on how to make sure that your tension is right from the get-go, how to check your tension with each bobbin, because the more we can stay ahead of these issues, the better this entire process is going to be. So I find that when working on a frame, it is more important than ever to get my tension right from the start so that I don't have issues much later down the road, okay? I've learned this the hard way. I was working on a quilt a couple of years back, and I had adjusted my tension, but then stepped away from the machine, came back a little while later, and assumed everything was still fine. That's always a dangerous assumption, all right? And what happened is I happily quilted along for several hours because it was a very wide quilt. And by the time I advanced the quilt up onto the roller and could see the back of it properly and could see the tension issues I was having, it took me almost 15 hours to unpick that quilt. I do not want that to ever happen to you. So we're going to cover some principles together right now to help prevent that and hopefully give you a little bit of peace of mind about your long arm tension heading into some quilting adventures. All right, rock stars, welcome under my long arm. I have loaded on here a small practice sandwich. It is about fat quarter sized. I do not always work on a fat quarter size practice sandwich, but if you are just getting used to setting the tension on your long arm for the very first time, I recommend just loading something little on here so you can play around. Now, remember, as I mentioned in the introduction, I have already adjusted the bobbin tension on this machine using my TOA tension gauge.
So from this point forward, we're only going to be adjusting the top tension. My tension knob's right up here out of the camera view. In order to fix our tension for the machine. Okay, so bottom tension has been adjusted to just under 200 micronewtons. That's what I consider to be standard, what I have been taught. And from this point forward, that will remain stable, and our only variable will be this top tension. So we're going to get started by simply lowering our needle and raising it up again in order to bring that bobbin thread to the top. Now, anytime I'm getting started adjusting tension, I start out just by stitching. So let's just do a little bit of loop-and-gander and a swirl. And some switchbacks and come back up to the top. So as you can see here, these top stitches look quite nice. I'm going to peek underneath, and what I see underneath, and I will show you this in a minute after we do a little bit more quilting, but what I see is that this top tension is actually showing on the back in the form of little bumps, causing that bobbin thread to float. So what that means is I need to tighten my top tension. So righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. I've got a knob, so I literally turn it to the right. If you have a computerized tension mechanism, then you'll click it to a higher number, just like we talked about over on the domestic machine. Again, just like on the domestic, if you have a presser foot raise and lower feature on your long arm, make sure you raise it to adjust your tension and then lower it back down. Now, I'm going to keep going. What you're probably noticing is that I like to do swirls and switchbacks and loops when I'm testing tension, because things like these points and the curves of these switchbacks are where bobbin tension will show if my top thread is starting to get too tight. So far, it's looking pretty good. The back is looking better, but still not where I'd like it to be. And like I said, I'll show you the back in just a second. So let's snug this up a little more and go at it again. All right, just doing some hooked swirls here of various forms. Poke my head under. So with each of these adjustments we've made thus far, I'm getting closer to my bottom stitches matching these stitches, but again, we're still not quite there. So tighten it down a bit more and let's keep going. All right, throwing in a few paisleys and a bit of McTavishing just for kicks. Aha, we have arrived. So what I'm seeing now is the underside of these stitches is matching the top. Let me double check them one more time. All right, and I'm actually going to pull this practice sandwich off. Let me grab my scissors. Raise my needle up, and I'm going to cut this thread as this comes off the machine. So we'll just slide this right off this practice sandwich and we can cut it right over here. Okay, so what you will see, right now you're seeing the lovely floor under my long arm, but what you should be able to begin to see here is how these stitches, you can see that nice clear stitch definition that's showing up on the back. Whereas, let me finish taking these pins out. This practice sandwich is going to flop down on us as I do that. How's this for the real life dealio here, right? All right. So what you can see back over here is even here on this swirl, do you see how we have just this little bit of eyelashing that was happening here? We've got a little bit more over here on this navy section. And throughout these switchbacks, we can see the stitches floating on top. There's a complete lack of stitch definition throughout this beginning section, which is so different from by the time we get over here to the end, and we can see these individual stitches just like on the top. And that is exactly what we're aiming for, is for clear stitches top and bottom. Now, this is going to be difficult to approximate because I've already pulled this off the machine, but I do just want to point out, if you're working on a for real quilt under your long arm, it obviously is not practical to put a practice sandwich like this up under your needle every single time you need to check your tension. Like, as fun as it is to just get to play around, that would require taking whole quilts on and off the frame in order to check when you've got a new bobbin, or if you change thread colors, or if you change thread weights mid-project, anything like that. So what I do is anytime I'm setting up my quilt, you can see here I had these top and the back lined up with one another when I was working today. What I normally do is I have the top, and then I have about 6 inches that I make the backing bigger on at least one side. I can get away with 3 to 4 inches on the other side, but I like to have the backing clearly bigger, usually on my right hand side. And I will run just a strip of scrap fabric down the side. And when I run that fabric down, it gives me a little scratch paper, if you will, alongside the top of my quilt where I can do this. And you notice I was able to flip, look at these lovely eyelashes, ooh la la. I was able to flip the edge of that quilt up a little bit in order to check my tension. So by running that scrap fabric down the edge of your quilt sandwich, so where there's some extra backing and batting like this, I create a little scratch paper where I can test my tension every time I change my bobbin, anytime I change thread color, anytime I change thread weight as I'm going along. And that's how, when you're working on a long arm, you can stay ahead of any tension problems so that you don't end up with a horrifying unpicking story like the one that I shared with you guys. All right, you guys, you are cleared for takeoff for quilting with Aurifil 40-weight thread on your long arm and ready to have a beautiful tension in the process.
There you have it, rock stars. My quick and easy tutorial for checking tension on your long arm, as well as some tips for making sure you get your tension right from the get-go so that you don't end up with issues halfway through your quilt and realize too late that things don't look quite the way you were hoping they would. Now, remember what I told you at the beginning. If you're unfamiliar with using a TOA gauge, I do recommend that you get one and you learn to use it. I have a tutorial available for you on my website that I'll put a link up for. And I'm really excited for you to be on this 2021 Color Builders journey. I hope if you're planning on doing any of your 40-weight quilting on your long arm, this has shown you how to get that going right so you get beautiful, crisp stitches. And the 40-weight thread really is an ideal candidate for being on a long arm. It's just a little bit thicker, a little bit stronger. It is ready to hold up to the speed and the rigor of being on a bigger machine. And I think you're going to be really pleased with the gorgeous stitching you can achieve. Happy quilting!